Hello, and welcome to Idea the Podcast series. This is a podcast where we talk about sociocultural topics in relation to our school, Herberger Design for the Arts, specifically the School of Music, Dance, and Theater. I'm your host for today. I'm Maddie, and I'm a graduate student in the ethnomusicology track here at ASU.
Hi, I'm Chris. I am a music theater master's student here at ASU. Um, yeah.
Go ahead.
I am Chino Soberano, and I am a fourth year doctoral student of violin performance. Sorry,
Hmm.
here in ASU, and I am also part of IDEA.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today, Gina. It's good to have you here.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. Well, everyone, today our topic is microaggressions. A pretty heavy word, but let me just kind of say a definition for it real quick so we kind of are all on the same page about what is a microaggression. Okay, so a microaggression is a comment or an action that subtly and often unconsciously or even unintentionally expresses a prejudiced attitude towards a member of a marginalized group, such as a racial minority or a gender or sexual minority, that kind of thing. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's our topic for today. It's
Heavy
also
topic,
kind of loaded. It's kind of a loaded topic
loaded topic, because I'm sure we've all experienced
And
like,
nuanced.
yeah,
and very nuanced for sure.
yeah, and our own fair shares of microaggressions. I'm sure we've
Mm-hmm.
all experienced.
What part or role does microaggressions have in Haida though? Like I'm sure people experience them every day in different settings, but as musicians and artists at Haida, why is understanding this kind of idea important, do you think?
Hmm. If you ask me, it's important for HIDA, for the school to recognize microaggressions because historically the arts have not been so kind with letting people, diverse people with diverse backgrounds, participate, at least in
Yeah,
Western
for sure.
European art,
It's always been
which,
very exclusive, yeah.
yeah. So I think it's really important for Haida to know microaggressions so that they would let the diverse student population be safe and
Mm,
to let them know that yes, we have a terrible past and we acknowledge that and we are not perfect in terms of an institution, but we want to make amends and do better.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, some of the more prominent microaggressions like I've seen around campus and like in classes and stuff is um, inclusive language is a big one, but also I've seen a lot of professors, male professors specifically, tend to gravitate towards not favoring, but sort of selecting all other male students. And that's more on an issue of gender versus race, but it's still as female presenting and female identifying. I personally notice that a lot more as microaggression because I'm not I'm I'm not selected or I'm not um, chosen, if you will. And I have other female students who also have experienced these things, and they're just like, yeah, I mean, it doesn't change anything drastically, but it does weigh on you to kind of know that the first choice is not going to be a woman or
Mhm.
something like that.
Yeah, especially like what you're talking about, like in the classroom experience, how teachers I think it's important that they're aware of the language that they're using,
For sure.
because a lot of the times those microaggressions come from that lack of awareness or knowledge of like the people in
Mm-hmm.
your room, you know. So
Right.
for instance, I've heard a lot of people give a lot of feedback about like pronouns and
Oh
addressing
yeah.
certain students with the correct pronouns, and a lot of those teachers fail to do that, even when the pronouns are listed on the screen, and they'll still like, say like call them by their inappropriate pronoun, and as someone, if someone is misidentified, like that is a form of microaggression because it may seem like nothing to them, but like that hurts the other person,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and not only that, when it comes down to um, music and art, I've known people who have not gotten more significant roles in a theater production because they're not white or something. And well, I know a lot of theater directors probably won't come out and say it's because they're not white. It's because they're not white or don't fit what someone thinks. Oh, Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz should look exactly like O'Hara or something like that, and who is specifically a white person. So someone else wouldn't fit that bill because, well, they're not white. No one's gonna come out and say that, but we all know it, kind of.
I had an experience one time where, now, I don't know if it's like actually like might be considered a microaggression, but like I was in the situation where I auditioned for a show, and because the show took place in I think the 60s or 50s or 70s or something, the director asked if which I think is a normal question, but asked me if I was willing to cut my hair to fit the show, and if I were to get a role there. And sometimes I feel a certain way when I'm asked that question because like for me, my hair means a lot to me. My dreads mean a lot to me, and that goes into a whole larger conversation about like the touching of people's hair, which is like, can I touch your hair, which is like a microaggression, like no,
it's just like,
I'm
no,
like,
stop,
I'm not an animal,
stop fetishizing it. It's just hair, please.
Like, it's just hair. Like, you got hair too. Like, I don't ask you if I could touch your hair. So it's just kind of like that thing, but like in the role of like being casted in shows and stuff like that, like I don't know, sometimes I feel like you should again be aware of the questions and who you're directing those things to and how that comes off, because for me sometimes that rubs off the wrong way, especially if it's like a board of white people asking, hey, can you cut your hair for the show that takes place in the 60s, since no black people had dreads in the 60s apparently, so, like come on.
Absurd.
Yeah. You could ask a white dude, hey, could you shave your mustache or beard for the show? That's one thing. But when you point that question at another demographic that has had these issues of people like the don't touch my hair issue, where people just kind of like exoticize any sort of hair that's not like white people hair. Directing that question at someone who's who's part of a demographic that has that history, it shows like someone has not put in the effort to examine the questions or be aware of their students. And yeah, it might come from a place of ignorance, but it also is a sign that someone hasn't put in the effort. Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's reason why microaggressions is so difficult to work out is because they usually come from a place of ignorance. And sometimes I just understand first, second time, like they don't know, but how long can we be patient with them?
Right. Like I've had professors in misidentify someone's pronouns or misgender people, and the first time is like maybe they just didn't know, and but then I've had friends like go to a professor or another doctoral student or something to say, just so you know, Maddie goes by they them kind of thing, and I've had people just disregard that, and they've been told. So the excuse of, it's just so hard to get used to it because I'm used to whatever. It's like, then that's a sign that you're not putting in the work to reorient how you view me as a person, which at that point I think becomes beyond the microaggression, like you were saying, Chino, that at what point do you just kind of draw a line in the sand and just go, you know what, you refuse to use my pronouns or something along those lines, and even though you've been told that this is something that isn't okay, it's incorrect,
Mm-hmm.
that's now at this point you're being purposefully hurtful because you've been told and you won't change it.
Mm.
Yeah, so there's definitely a line.
And in coming from the perspective of how it affects us, these microaggressions, these kinds of things, like, we deal with sometimes most of the times on a day-to-day basis, but this kind of stuff builds up, and it affects us. It affects us both. It affects our mental health. It's like it builds up, kind of like stress. Like to go in your work experience and face these sorts of microaggressions, or in your classroom and face these microaggressions, like that hurts.
Yeah, you shouldn't have to like be getting ready for a production or recital or something and be wondering, oh my gosh, are they going to view me differently for playing or performing this thing and I'm not blank whatever. Having to be worried about, oh, are people going to interpret this a different way because I'm this ethnicity or this gender or
Mm-hmm.
something, affects people's ability to make music and be artists. And like I know someone who didn't think blind auditions were necessary because they thought like, oh, I don't see color, which as a microaggression in and of itself, but that means it's
Yeah.
just like, oh,
it's like you choose to ignore people's different identities, basically. Is that's what they're saying, basically? Like, they choose to ignore, these, what our society kind of runs off of, because like our society's full of people of different cultures and background and stuff like that. And it's you saying like, I'm gonna ignore that, and I'm gonna ignore like the disadvantages and advantages that some people have.
Yeah, well, not only that, but it's like it's making it about them now. It's like, oh, I don't see color. You're trying to coat over and say, oh, I'm not racist, but I'm not going to say that like that. I'm just saying, oh, I don't see color. I see people as equals, which makes it about them and not about how can I approach someone else's experience kind of thing.
Yeah, I remember. It wasn't towards me, but there was this master class by this famous person in our field, and one violinist performed really well for them, and they keep on mispronouncing that student's name because that student's name is of Asian origin, and it was sad that no one had the courage to point it out to them, because at least for a student like me, I wouldn't dare go go against that person because of the powerful they are in terms of the achievements they have and the connections, and
the authority
they
dynamic.
the authority, they are a wonderful teacher, and maybe it is they are coming from ignorance, but there has been a lot of Asian students, Asian violinists all over the US. So why choose to not choose, or why just be comfortable saying it the way that you would think it would be pronounced, even though it's wrong?
Yeah, I've heard this little quip before, but it's like, if people can learn to say Tchaikovsky, they can learn to pronounce someone's name. Like,
Yeah.
Tchaikovsky is like a really, really insanely spelled word, but people can say it and spell it. So there's no excuse for choosing not to learn someone's name or learn someone's pronouns. And microaggressions go beyond just names and stuff. It's also about, like you were talking about, Chris, with hair, even. It can go to someone's dress or the way they dress. Like, I know a lot of people consider the same outfit on different people to mean different things. Like, I've seen white dudes show up to class in like gym shorts and a hoodie. It's no big deal. But then I've also heard a lot of people who aren't white who show up to class in gym shorts and a hoodie as ghetto, or just not taking things seriously because they don't dress better, which is specifically a microaggression of just the assumption that someone who's not white, specifically Black American people, dressing and what white people consider to be less than professional is only evident on not white people.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to talk about that and about kind of like the comments that are made that can also pass off as microaggressions, um, in the sense that you know, like someone will, this has happened to me and my mom in the past before,
Oh,
but like kind of just like we'll be talking to someone or we'll be over the phone over with someone and they're like, "Oh wow, you speak really well," and I'm sure that happens to other demographics of people as well. You know, mine,
Asians a lot.
yeah, Asians too, because like, it's just kind of like, oh wow, you speak well, like you speak well because you speak closer to um, what I see as like speaking well as or American, you know, which is
your
like
own dialect,
your own
basically.
dialect, but like that's that's BS because like you know they speak well in their own language. You know, it's kind of like again you're just like pigeonholing yourself in like this American dialect and putting that to the upper standard and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, like getting those sorts of comments, you know, you kind of just like, and how am I supposed to respond to that? Like you speak well, it's just like you know, you're just kind of
What's not well?
like what's
What's
not well,
not good speech? Oh, it's what you expect a black person to speak like, or an
right?
Asian person to speak like, or whatever.
And this goes into like the clothes that you were talking about, like you know representation of like what we're able to wear and how we dress and stuff like that. You know, those are all those all change depending on your identity and who you are. And it's also kind of like those associations of like of of those associations of like culture attached to people. Like just
Hmm.
because like I'm black doesn't mean I necessarily listen to rap music, you know?
Yeah. And like a lot of these things aren't going to be like someone's going to come out and say like they think all black people or all Asian people or all gay people. They're not going to come out and say that because it's the fact is it's a microaggression. And in the definition, it's a subtle, often unconscious or unintentional expression of a prejudiced attitude. What are some ways you think, or have you seen before, you think that might be able to address microaggressions in a way that can maybe I guess negate not negate the problem, but sort of circumnavigate the flow of what often happens in a microaggression. Someone says something, people are awkward, don't know how to respond, and the person who's affected um, has to deal with that. What are some ways you've seen solutions maybe in the classroom, in ensembles?
I've seen it before. Usually, it would be correcting that person, but in a civil way, and not in an accusatory tone immediately.
Yeah.
That's how some people were able to finally convince people from the other side from their way of thinking and inviting them to the conversation of times are changing, there's more genders and sexualities, and there's more races out there and cultures, and we have to respect them.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that your identity is not important. It's just
Right.
adding more people on the table. That's one. And I don't know, I haven't done this before, but if that person repeatedly makes mistakes, then repeatedly correct them until they get annoyed. I don't know. I haven't been in that position because,
Mm-hmm.
again, I am Asian Pacific Islander because I'm from the Philippines. And as Filipino society, we were taught to be submissive and docile when it comes to interacting with another person, especially with elderly
Ah,
people.
okay. That's interesting.
And you just want to get away from confrontation as much as possible. But sometimes you just need to confront them.
Hmm.
Doesn't have to be a heated argument.
I
Uh,
do know that when it comes to like faculty members, if it's something where they repeatedly like mispronounce your name, you've talked to them about it, and they make excuses like, "Oh, I'm old and can't get used to this," or "Oh, I try, I just can't," whatever. then I do know that when it's involving faculty and staff, you can take it higher up and to
Yes.
especially with course evaluations. Oh, course evaluations are perfect for this, because it'll reflect on how I, as a student, didn't feel comfortable with this professor because of these list microaggressions, which will get to not only the attention of the professor, but whoever who's I higher up who does the reviews. And I mean, the more students who shedding light on them, whether it's like taking something up to a head of a department or something, or in course evaluations, the more people are going to see, oh, I see a recurring pattern of when this professor or faculty in general say this kind of thing, it makes students uncomfortable. Let's investigate that.
It's also, for me, it's hard. It's hard because my experience of like correcting people with their microaggressions, like, you get the defensiveness that immediately comes up, that is immediately projected, out, and then usually they end up making the same mistake, and like I will repeat these things, and be like, hey, that's not okay, like stop doing that, like, or stop saying that, or and they always make excuses
Right.
for that
Yeah.
reason, for why they did
They take
that.
it as a personal attack almost.
And even when you say it, even when you call them out, they don't seem to learn. And so like it's like the only way for like people to learn, I guess, is like, I guess educating yourself is like the first and foremost thing. We're American, we live in a melting pot, but like I feel like, the differences that we have, where like there's communities are segregated from one another, like it's hard to like really, like, if you live in like a secluded kind of area, like where you just grow up around, like, let's say like a white suburbia, and you went to a high school that has like predominantly white people, like how are you gaining that experience? Even if you read it in textbooks and stuff like that, like it's still another thing with interacting, and then those microaggressions come out, and it's kind of like how are we as a society, like when like systems are implemented, like redlining and stuff like that, where we keep pushing those communities into like those secluded spots, like it's like how are we able to like reduce those microaggressions and stuff? It seems like an impossible task, and I know
Right.
it sounds
Yeah.
kind of pessimistic.
It's not until people are going to actually enforce people in authority to actually educate themselves on stuff that we're actually going to see any changes, because a lot of people get set in their ways, or if it's people who are older than our age, they're going to say, well, I grew up with it this way, so it should be fine. I think our age demographic is used to adapting to new terminology or new or being aware of these things. And so with someone who's older, our generation is for sure.
Yeah.
And for older generations and age brackets, the culture they grew up in that was formative to their young adult years was a lot more, this is how you do things, boom, done, move on. So kind of trying to confront that gap of approaching change is, definitely think, a lot harder, but and also unfortunately we kind of have to enforce change,
Which is
to a certain extent.
Definitely.
Which is wild, because we're a society, and societies evolve and progress the same way.
Yeah, things change all the time. The
same way technology improves, the same way how you get your new iPhone. Like, I'm sure you can understand like the new terminologies for a group of people, or like how is that so hard? Why is that any? I mean, they are different, but like,
Yeah, I was reading up something on that I think can be related to this, on why there's such a difference between older ages and younger ages when it comes to technology, is because the way they grew up with things like rotary telephones, library card systems, that was the way it always happened, and everyone knew, and it didn't really change. It wasn't until like the last 20 to 30 years where things started rapidly progressing at a regular rate, where our age demographic is used to it changing, and so has adapted to, oh, the terminology I use for like Microsoft Word or something, it's going to change eventually, and we internalize that. Where older age groups, they used to think staying the same, and so they never really learned how to accept new terminology as they move forward. So in the same way with microaggressions, it's like the questions that you might have been able to get away with 40 years ago can't apply anymore, or people's pronouns are a thing that should be considered because that's where we are culturally, or those kinds of things. And there's definitely, I think, an age segregation. Not saying that all older people are like this, but as the differences in the societies that people grew up in via time will affect how well they can receive change like that.
That I
You need
completely
to find
agree
that
with
link.
that point. Yeah. But I think, well, right now it looks bleak when we think about how are we going to confront this. But let's take a step back, and maybe for me, what made me feel a lot better is now accountability in
Mm,
terms of younger people are now more or less capable of holding other people accountable. That is something that these older generations cannot do.
yeah,
And I
I think
think we need to use this power of accountability through social media, through the internet, wisely and properly, because
respectfully.
it could go haywire as well.
Yeah, for sure.
I just want to add on to that and just say like you're absolutely right. Like I feel like our generation is leaning towards more of an accountability type of thing because we see this through like the Me Too movement can be some form of like accountability because it's kind of just like calling out people who have done improper things. I feel like our generation is when something doesn't fly anymore, like we're just like nah, like we'll say something about that. Sometimes even if it doesn't like necessarily like apply to us, we feel like we know that like this isn't how we should be saying things or doing things nowadays, and so
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yes. I was talking to Jose and Brianna about it, but I was talking about the rise of anti Asian racism and
Oh
how
yeah.
it's not being covered much. As an Asian, I think the reason why anti Asian racism is more or less still invisible to other people is because Asians were model minorities. We were taught by colonial powers to you have to live your life this way in order to fit in, quote unquote, fit in to our society. And we were so assimilated with what they think
Mhm.
a right way of living that sadly generally Asians would rather just be silent, just going to do my own thing, doesn't concern me. And also I will acknowledge that because of that thinking of the Muslim minority, generally older Asians think like old white people where they are suspicious of other races, especially to black people. There is anti-black racism in Asian communities, in the States, in Europe, in Asia. And I acknowledge that. And there has been more and more action from younger generations of Asians, and I'm proud of that. But I think it's also part of the problem that it's not being covered much because other minorities were back, pushed away by the notion that, oh, Asian people, again, microaggressions, they just they just want money, they just work, they don't really care about anything else besides money. Yeah, we I just dream of a solidarity between minorities and fighting racism, and it's not like, it's sad that I see Twitter fights about, oh, why would we speak up for you, you didn't speak up for us. And it's like,
Oh,
again, it's a quote unquote
Interesting.
oppression Olympics. And then it's kind of sad, please don't reduce it to that.
Yeah.
Racism is hate, and we are minorities too, and I experienced that too. Someone did this to me in my master's back in Illinois, and
oh,
I don't know if that's
Mm.
even true greeting for some communities in Asia. And I'm Filipino, and we don't use that gesture. There's another microaggression where I cooked a Filipino dish for a potluck in a summer festival that I chamber music summer festival that I've been to. And this white guy, I think, uh, well meaning, saw my food and was like, "Oh, it looks uncooked. Let me grill it for you." So he took the chickens to the grill and was about to put the chicken. I was like, "No, no, no, no. That's already cooked. I'm sorry." And guess which which food was gone first? Mine.
As it should.
That sounds like it would be really good.
There is also Asian to Asian racism. There is a lot of that, like East Asians viewing other Asians, like Southeast Asians, like me, negatively because we're not as progressed or well off as a region, like Vietnam or Indonesia, Malaysia.
But going back to what you said about the people talking about basic Olympics in regard to like who
Oppression Olympics. I
Oppression
think one
Olympics.
writer put it that way.
I didn't know that was happening. Like, I mean, I knew that there was a lot of like, you know, anti-Asian, you know, hate that was happening, you know, in relation to the coronavirus. But I didn't know that that was happening. Where because like, though y'all are being affected too. You know, like a lot of racist remarks are coming your way, and I didn't know that that other people were saying, why should we stand up for you when you guys didn't stand up for us? And that's interesting. For instance, like, the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of the LGBTQIA movements banded together, specifically with like the trans with the trans movement as well. And we collaborate together, because we're all in this together. And I think that's the approach that we should be leading towards, that collaboration of like, we're all oppressed. We need to fight this common enemy of racism,
regardless of where it's coming from.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's going to do it for us today, folks. This has been Idea the Podcast series. You can find us on YouTube, where we publish it, and we also have an Instagram page you should follow and check out. All the links to our social media are in the description below. If you want us to hear us talk about a specific topic, or if you want to be a guest on the show, feel free to like, subscribe, put something in the comments. Feel free to reach out. We'd love to hear from you.
Also, Mosaic, do you want to quickly?
Yes. Mosaic, the School of Music, Dance, and Theater community will have a virtual showcase of performances featuring members of our community performing works by BIPOC and or queer composers, choreographers, playwrights, and all performance artists.
That's so cool.
Yes. So we've been getting submissions, and I might submit one myself too. The due date for the recordings is on March 17th, and the premiere would be in the evening of April 17th, to be discussed what time that would be. We plan on maybe having a really max duration of an hour and 30 minutes. Hopefully we could have it less. It still depends on how many people submit, but if you want to submit, it can be a past recording. 5 to 8 minutes is a good range.
That sounds like a lot of fun, especially
so if you're interested at all in like submitting a video, please do, and just contact one of us if you're confused about that, and also just come check it out on the 17th tentatively.
Yeah, it's gonna be super cool.
Yeah, if y'all want to contact me too directly about Mosaic or any other things about Idea, you could contact me in my email. It's rcsobera@asu.edu.
Yeah, and we'll put that in the description down below.
Great.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you next time. Or hear you next time.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.